Hello, and welcome to the Center Clueless podcast, a podcast that takes a day-by-day approach to politics. I am one of your co-hosts, Billy Ray Brewton, and with me is your other co-host, Erik Surwill.
Billy Ray.
Erik.
This is crazy. Erik Surwill, Schlub 2. Billy Ray, actually
Schlub
Schlubus Primus. I'll be Schlubus Secundus. It'll be great. So
You
here
know,
we are.
I've been working on that title of schlub since I was about 16 years old. So the fact that it's come to fruition now is really making my heart sing.
It was so appropriate, and worse when you put the damn website together and stuck our heads next to each other. I'm like, wow, looks like two schlubs.
It does. I was really impressed with that, actually.
I was like, oh my God, two little fat heads and schlub 1, schlub 2. I'm like, well, at least it's descriptive and we're not overselling ourselves, right?
Well, and let's be clear here too. I mean, it's been so long since people have been able to listen to two cis white dudes talking about issues. There just aren't enough podcasts
At least
that
5
feature
minutes.
cis white dudes.
At least 5 minutes since they were, downloading some a-hole on YouTube or something else.
Yeah, well, we definitely fit into that. So why are you here? Well, you're here because you're listening to the Center Clueless podcast. And this episode is designed to sort of give you an idea of what this podcast is all about, why in the hell Erik and I are taking time out of our lives to create this podcast, and, get you a little familiar with your co-host. Because let's be clear, you may listen to us and be like, this is not my bag. These two schlubs are not going to live in my ears rent-free. And I totally understand. There are plenty of other podcasts out there for you that probably fit with you a lot better. So if we're for you, awesome. Keep listening. If we're not, piss off.
Yeah, right. I mean, and yeah, everything you said is correct there. I think I would add to that to be fair, and part of the reason why we're here is while our views that we state here may even be controversial to you or even offensive, the whole reason why I'm here, at least, is to learn and to expose myself. And the fact that now that you've been setting up the future guests, the reality that I'm probably going to have to, if I'm going to be authentic here about it, taking a book a week. Well, here's the drive I needed to actually start reading books again and not sit on Twitter 6 hours a day outside of everything else that I do.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that too, because I read mostly fiction these days. It's been a while since I've really been reading political, nonfiction in any kind of substantive way. And I'm looking forward to that because I'll hear about books all the time where I'm like, damn, that sounds like a really interesting read. And I just never hit it. And so now I'm going to be required to, which is actually really nice.
Right. And for me, I got like 5 books over here on my bookshelf that I'm like, 3 to 12% through. And I just haven't made that time to finish out a book. And doing this will honestly give me a task to complete, which sometimes is what I need to get things done, honestly.
Well, maybe let's start by giving a little bit of a background on how we know each other, because folks might be interested to know, and I certainly find it to be a very interesting story. Erik used to be my boss.
Yep. Billy Ray was my IT support technician at VIP Community Mental Health Center, where I'm actually still the IT director now. I believe I was a manager at the time, but I've taken on greater roles and responsibilities there. And honestly, I did terrible things to Billy Ray when I first had him. When I had him come interview with me, I made him walk up the hill to the OPD building, where it's one of the places that we run. It's actually the outpatient center at the LA County Hospital. I made him walk all the way up the hill, and I realize now that I was in much better shape. I was riding 150 miles a week on my bike, and I'm like, hey, let's see if Billy Ray can handle this. And I walked him up the hill. Not even sure that's legal, to be honest, but it's what happened. And Billy Ray put up with me probably at my worst in my management space. And honestly, I really appreciate all of that because, man, the days where I would be yelling at a vendor, just railing at a vendor, and he'd be sitting in the back giggling at me because I'm literally being this caricature of the asshole manager. And
I would stop whatever I was doing, I would stop, take off my headphones, and just listen to whatever string of almost profanities were about to come out. Almost profanities, because Erik was professional enough to not be like, fuck you, motherfucker, but like he was still, with his tone of his voice, he was essentially saying, go fuck yourself.
Right. I would restate what was happening. Usually something, by the way, to be fair, in the case of the vendor I was talking to, it was ridiculous. It was ridiculous what was going on. I'm like, you recommended it, you put it in. It doesn't even work in this state. And now the entire agency's shut off because of you. And you want to tell me that there's a process I got to go. It was ridiculous. Anyway.
What you're going to learn through the course of this podcast is occasionally both Erik and I will sort of make some analogous comments that are probably all tied back to IT. So for any IT lovers out there, this is going to give you an extra little cherry on top of the political sundae.
Oh yeah, and what's worse is I approach my entire political space from that. Like I've become such an IT guy that I keep taking that lens, that ITIL lens of how to deliver a service and how to audit a service, and then I start applying it to these various things. And it's terrible. For instance, when I apply it to my marriage, my wife looks at me and goes, "You're not in a business with me." That's fair.
Well,
That's fair.
What is a marriage but a very complicated business arrangement?
Right. I mean,
that's what Judge Judy would say.
Don't look now. Our Western cultural space is just rearing its head. Here we go.
That's right.
It's the white guy thing. Anyways.
Well, we are that. We are a couple of white guys. But yeah, that's how Erik and I know each other. And we just stayed friends after I left VIP. We just sort of stayed friends. We kept in contact. And, we used to have a lot of very heated political discussions down in the basement. And so when it was time to come up with a podcast, it was like, well, hell, who can I yell at every single week and still come back the next week and still respect their opinion and not want to throttle them? And it was like Erik.
Right. And by the way, I'll tell you, I had thought about doing a podcast for years because I would hear stuff on other podcasts and it's like I wanted to jump in and talk. And to be fair, though, I don't have the cachet. I don't have the background. You do. To be fair, you absolutely have it. To a degree, except we'll get into that, right? But outside of it, well, anyways, you're here. You asked me to do it. I am happy to come do it, and I promise you that I bring to this the reality that I will at least I'll deal with it with integrity. I'll come here and I'm going to be authentic. I'm not going to hold back. I mean, we have a couple of things we'll hold back on, and that is there's certain professional conversations you and I can't have because we don't have the consent of the organization that we work for. They specifically said, yeah, you could talk about each other. You could talk about fun, cool stuff, but don't talk about stuff that has other people involved that would require their legal consent, and we're not going to. No. Outside of that single restriction, right? And you probably have the same things for any organization you're working with. Outside of that, I promise to, as I stated earlier, show my whole ass. I am not going to look good about it. If it comes up, I'm just going to throw it down here. And to be fair, it may be that action and the resulting response that has me reassess where I'm coming from. And that's perfect for me, at least.
Yeah. And this whole idea of the podcast came because, as I told Erik, I'm kind of going through what I call a midlife crisis a little bit. And a lot of that does have to do with politics in a big way because, I've spent my entire life and we'll get into our individual stories in a second, but this is kind of a general idea. But, I've been a Democrat all my life, a registered Democrat. I voted for the first time in the 2000 election. So basically threw away my vote. But the older I get, the more I find myself drifting further and further towards the middle to the point where now I don't know if I consider myself a centrist, but I am like just slightly left of center. Wow. And in another 5 years, who knows? I might be directly mid-center. Right. And I'm struggling with that a little bit because I've always considered myself a progressive. And I still think that I am. I think just the definition of what a progressive is and means has changed over the years. And so I'm just now having to reckon with this idea that maybe I'm not as liberal as I've always thought that I was. And you know what? Maybe that's okay.
Right. I've in talking in the talks that went on between you and I as we were reviewing this, you keep saying that. And I'm like, man, if you're center left, am I centrist or maybe even center right? But I actually don't believe that because I still hold very leftist values. If anybody Googles me, one of the things that I believe in as an example via the vehicle of a welfare state is we live in a country that's the richest country in the world. It is ridiculous that we can't guarantee housing, clean food, competent health care, and education, good education, to every single member of this society. That's not a right-wing space. It's just not. When I talk to Republicans, they revile me for that. When I'm debating with some of my friends and with people maybe you're not so much my friends, that's a left, that's a socialist, that's communist. I'm like, well, I don't see it through the lens of socialism or communism. I actually see it through the lens of the welfare state, that there's this competitive reality that we all live in out there. Capitalism, beyond capitalism, but that framework, that, again, very Western, very European, American cultural framework that's going to leave people behind. And in a modern society where we've essentially defeated all the big things, the fact that we can't guarantee those simple things is ridiculous to me. As a person that has to provide systems that work for everybody, it is absolutely ridiculous. So I don't think that that's a right wing or even center. I think that's a very left wing position to hold. But maybe some of the other stuff I have sounds, but we'll see, right? By the way, you and I are both very right wing in that we both believe in gun ownership. Specifically,
that is
we
correct.
both own guns. I mean, that's an interesting where you and I are alike. But anyways, keep going. Sorry.
That's a good point to make. Is like, there are certain areas that I know liberals and progressives really have issues with. And like, even now, I live in Seattle now. I run a very progressive nonprofit here in Seattle. And whenever I have friends over, once they find out that I own a gun, the air is sucked out of the room. It generally is. Right. Anybody I tell that I own a gun here is shocked because they consider me a liberal and can't believe I would own one, but also shocked that I guess I don't come across as the type of person who would own a gun. But at the same time, like, I grew up in Alabama, for God's sakes. I've been using guns since I was like 5 years old. And so, yeah, I do own firearms. I do believe in the Second Amendment. I think, like a lot of people, I think we need stricter regulations.
Well, of course. Yeah. I mean, we have more regulation driving a car.
But here's the thing.
Gun owners should have insurance, as an example. You should have to insure your stuff. It is a dangerous item. But again, that's a liberal guy talking. Keep going. Sorry.
But no, that's the thing, is like, what you're going to hear me, at least maybe both of us, talk about a lot is I would say the erosion of nuance in any political conversation and on any political issue. And guns is a perfect example, where it's like, you either have to be anti-gun, meaning that you want all guns gone, Second Amendment abolished, or you're pro-gun, which you want no regulations. And like, most of us, or at least it seems like, if you look at polls, the majority of Americans are in favor of sensible gun regulations and sensible gun control policies.
Yes.
And that's the big issue. So, what I said at the beginning is this podcast is trying to take a day-by-day approach to politics, which is true. But in a deeper level, I'm also trying to get to the bottom of why everything is so fucking broken, why people cannot seem to get on the same page. And, I watched the White House Correspondents' Dinner last night. We're recording this the morning after. And what drove me crazy was seeing this room full of Democrats and Republicans making jokes on each other, seeing them laugh at one another's jokes, and like, they're actually taking it in good spirits. And I'm like, why can't you take this same energy and actually transfer it to passing legislature and policy? And like, why can't you? I don't understand it. It's like,
could you imagine if that's what it was like on the floor of Congress? If you could sit there and be collegial in that space, why not go into the floor of Congress or into the Senate and be collegial? Look, the belief systems are still there. They're still Republicans and they're still Democrats. And to be fair, I think that there's a gradated range of belief in there. I don't think it's black or white necessarily, but the horse and buggy show of tribalism, I don't think they get it, but it's affecting culture in a negative way. It's affecting the American pluralistic dream, which it was, right? Yeah. It's pluralism in America. It's the sharing of amazing and good cultural ideas across all of the people that live here that have created one of the most effective, one of the most successful organizations in the world, which is the American system. Yes, I know it's done terrible things, and yes, I know that it's responsible for terrible things. And just to give one of my priors as an example, here's a good example. when we talk about reparations.
Yeah.
So many people talk about reparations, and the fact of the matter is I'm pro reparations. But I'm not pro reparations out of some sense, honestly, of guilt, because I am not responsible for the crimes of my forefathers. That's ridiculous. I had two great uncles who were Kleagles in the Ku Klux Klan. They're assholes. Part of my family broke away from them and ran to California to get away from that mess while they were there in the middle of attacking and murdering blacks back in Iowa, back in that area. I have family that was part of that bullshit. That being said, there is an organization around that still owes that bill, and that's the American government, the American system itself still owes that bill to those people. It's an unpaid bill. And to pretend, right? To pretend that blacks and the enslavement of blacks wasn't one of that their labor, their blood, their sweat, their tears wasn't. Without them, the United States wouldn't be what it is. Period.
Absolutely.
You could say that.
Yeah.
I also am not going to go back and go, I feel guilty and go like wash people's feet, which is ridiculous, right? Or I'm not going to take a word like woke, appropriate it for my use, and use it as a cudgel against the right. That is a black word. That is a word that blacks used, political blacks used. That's their word. Come up with a better word. Don't take that so you can put on the coat of blackness on your white ass and come beat up conservative whites with that. That's ridiculous too, as an example. So I totally get where you're coming from, and that's sort of my expansion on it.
Well, that's actually a good segue into, because right now we're going to get into some back and forth and kind of introduce you to us in kind of a deeper way. And so we're going to do it in sort of a loose question and answer format. I'm going to talk to Erik a little bit about his political history, and then he's going to do the same. But I want to start out because I think this is what forms most of us and most of our politics, especially when we're younger. Talk about sort of, where does your family fall on the political spectrum, and what was sort of your political upbringing as a kid?
Well, when I was a child, I lived in my house, in the house I'm in now. Actually, this is my grandmother's house. I lived here from birth to 6 with my mom and my grandma, and my mom was a single mom in the 1970s, which was not an easy thing, I assure you. Most banks in California didn't allow a single woman to have a bank account without her father or her husband co-signing for it. One of the reasons why my mom was a lifelong Bank of America person is the bank before them was Security Pacific Bank, which was one of the banks in LA that would give a woman an account without the signature of her father or her husband. So just that's the context into which I was born. And I was kind of lucky, I think, because that space of women's rights was something that it's been there as long as I know, like that second wave feminism. It was a group of second wave feminists, friends of my mother, who were really my initial introduction to politics. And because, my mom would bring me to their house. They were, of course, supportive of her as a single mother, right? That was an empowering move for them. They were oftentimes maybe politically my mom's friend as well as actual friends, right? Like they also sort of felt a sense of political action. And that's what I grew up in. And then, my grandmother it's funny because the first story my grandmother talked to me, because my grandmother, by the way, I want to be clear, my grandmother was no saint. Yeah. She was virulently racist towards Mexicans and the Hispanic culture. It was terrible. She called my best friend, Art, who's still a really good friend of mine, really one of my best friends, obviously still. She used to call him the Macho Mex, which is just like, dude, what are you doing? And I would make fun of her. I'm like, what is wrong with you? Because the first story she told me about in the space of the Black reality in the 70s was my grandmother, when she was 17, had been sitting in a classroom, and they would draw figures. And they brought a 19-year-old Black man in there to take his shirt off, which to me, just imagine doing this now, how ridiculous that would be. And they were doing character drawings in high school. My grandmother, after class, went and had a soda with the Black man at I can't remember, maybe it was Thrifty's, but I'm making that up. I don't remember where she had it. Someone at her school found out, and she had to change high schools. So my first story was about my grandmother being, reviled and really canceled. That was old school conservative cancel. She had to move high schools because she went out with a Black kid when she was 17 just once.
Yeah.
My great grandfather forbade her from ever talking to a Black person like that again. You will never bring a Black man home. If you are, you're disowned. So there was that reality that I was born into, is the ridiculousness of that. And as a child, I heard that. I'm like, and I'm just a child, right? Children are unprogrammed. And to me, at least my gut feeling at the time, that is so ridiculous. So I sort of had this early, very, I think, liberal space that I was born into, or at least liberal dominated space. But still, in the rest of the family, they were very much blue dog Democrats, or at least the LA, California version of blue dog Democrats. They had guns. There was still racism, right? They were Democrats. But here's an example. Like, yes, they believed in welfare. But what they didn't believe in is this family ever using welfare. That would be ridiculous. You are a failure. How dare you embarrass? It was like that kind of almost begrudging understanding, because I think that, and I'll leave it at this part so you can ask more questions. Everybody was affected by the downturn, the economic downturn in the 20s. Sure. And so everybody kind of understood. I had people in my life, my grandmother's boyfriend, for instance. By the way, ironic that you're in Seattle and we're hearing police cars. I'm kidding.
Well, no, it's actually the norm for this,
right,
for this city.
It's like helicopters here in LA. But my grandmother's boyfriend for years, Emil Carl, who was actually a producer, cartoon producer in LA, was amazing. He ate for 3 years out of people's gardens until he went to the army, or the Air Force, right, in the end. And so that's the space that I started in. I mean, do you want me to explain where I was first politically activated? We talked about these before.
Well, yeah. No, we're gonna segue into that right now, which is kind of like, because that's that's the background, right? So that's what's building that foundation. And so I look at it as like that's what's filling the firework up with gunpowder. So at what point?
By the way, absolutely, yes.
Yeah. So at what point does the rocket take off? So at what point do you have any inkling of any sort of like political allegiance personally or activation?
Right. You know, when it's funny, when we were thinking about this, I realized we were thinking about when I was confronting all the reading I was going to have to do. I remembered that when I was a child, when I would have trouble sleeping, the way I would deal with that, I wasn't allowed out of the room. You know, there was a rule that once you're in bed, you're in bed. Don't come out. You don't get to come talk to me, and you don't get to watch your TV. And I would do things. Sometimes I would like turn the TV on, and I would plug it in, and I would hold my hand on the off button. I had like a little black and white TV about this big, which is a lot for 75, right? But still, and I would turn it off, like right as my mom tried to come in to catch me and try to put my arm down. But what she would, I think, tacitly allow me to do is read. And so I would read, and I would read some books that were political in nature, early ones. And then she allowed the radio. So what I started doing is I would listen to KPFK in LA. That was the super progressive radio. And at the middle of the night, there was a guy, I can't remember his name now. He would do political shows each night. One night was actually Alan Watts, which sort of got me involved in Alan Watts, which is a thing that I really listened to and I have that teach me even today. But they would have very political programming from midnight on. I'll remember his name at some point because I want to honor him eventually. And it was very, very, very left-wing. It was as progressive as you could get in that time, which is the late 70s, early 80s, you know, and through there. And one night, and another program, and this is actually what activated me, is there's a gentleman named Frank Sontag who had a Sunday night show, late night again, on I think it was on one of the rock stations, and he brought on the two Peters at the time. They're named Peter and Peter. I can't remember the last names, from Earth First, which was an environmental organization.
Yep.
And they talked about taking direct action against loggers. And if anybody knows anything about Earth First, is ultimately that organization was designated as an environmental terrorist organization, right?
Yeah.
Much like the Animal Liberation Front. Although Earth First had a very different space and view of animals, it was a very libertarian organization. In fact, now, if you would consider, it was a very center-right libertarian organization that believed in tearing down the structures around logging and the other structures that were destroying the environment. And that really triggered me. I was either late 16 or early 17. I joined Earth First and took action, got arrested before I was 18 with Earth First. And that was my first political action in the world, was to be part of Earth First, to go to Earth First events, to go to protest, to take direct. I took direct action. I slammed nails into trees. I did that once, but I still did it. We sabotaged equipment. It was ridiculous and crazy now in my mind, but I got away with it. I got arrested a few times before I was 18, not really much after. Because of a medical situation. I became diabetic, and I had to become very concerned about how to manage that. But man, from late 16s through my 18th birthday, that's how I started. That was the beginning.
Well, I actually had never heard anything about your Earth First experience, so that's actually really fascinating.
Yeah,
Um, so,
crazy.
so we talked about earlier, at least I talked about briefly on mine, about how I've sort of started leaning more and more towards the center as I've gotten older. So we kind of know where you started out. Where were you 10 years ago, and where are you today on the political spectrum?
Well, here's what's weird. I mean, to be fair, I haven't changed much since I
Uh-huh.
was that 16-year-old. To be fair, I have a different view of direct action. I'm not saying that I wouldn't take direct action today. I absolutely would. But I have a sense of the impact of that. When I
Yeah,
was a 16-year-old kid, the context is much different than a 53-year-old husband and father.
sure,
Meaning, if
sure.
I was to take direct action and get some consequence, it's going to affect far more than I. It's going to affect the organization that I work for. It's going to affect my wife. It's going to affect my child. And to be fair, I have a greater response. I took that on. And if I'm going to be authentic about the commitments I made, I need to be sufficiently risk adverse to
Yeah,
do that. Now, to be fair, if some crazy thing went down and some fascist took power, you bet your ass I'm taking direct action. And not only am I
yeah,
going to take direct action, I'm going to take direct action as who I am now, right?
yeah,
That being said, I haven't really changed much since those days. And to be fair, significant things have look. There were transgendered people, for instance, in my space back then, like with Peorage, can't remember their name. They just passed, right?
yeah,
And they were huge in that community, right? Um, there were obviously cross dressers. I was a little metal kid. There was cross dressing and gender bending in that space. Twisted
yeah,
Sister, early Motley Crue, or even throughout most of Motley Crue's big years, or
yeah,
or you had you know. You know what I'm saying? There was,
yeah,
and I was pro that. Like I thought it was funny. I didn't care. I didn't
yeah.
care. That this was being done, and so I had, and these were all very leftist spaces. As things have progressed now, I still have that feeling,
Yeah.
but but that's not enough now. It's not enough to hold those views now. That there's this whole there's a in this case at least there's a gender ideology that you have to eat the entire meal or you're a bigot
Yeah.
or you believe in genocide. And so while I still hold all of these leftist spaces, I don't hold them necessarily in the way that many other people hold them. So yeah.
Yeah, which I will get into that when I start talking in a few minutes. Yeah, so we're gonna be talking about a lot of different shit, a lot of different shit
Right.
on this podcast.
Right.
We've got some amazing guests lined up, a lot of different topics we're gonna explore. I want to know a little bit about when we're broaching these different conversations about all of these sort of hot button issues. Talk a little bit about your context and where you're coming from. You've touched on it a little bit, but give a little more depth about where you're coming from when we're going into those discussions.
Well, so here's the thing. Even now, in talking about this podcast, you and I have talked about various guests, and I've now gone out and watched some documentaries. I've read a little bit, and I've already been confronted in some of the areas where I felt, where I think I would be considered more of a centrist or even maybe center right. And I've now had to realize that I now understand where my concerns are, right? And I think we'll go over it, but I want what we're doing here is I want to educate myself, because again, I'm not this guy with political cachet. I'm just an IT guy
Yeah.
who likes to apply my view onto reality and try to absorb it. And I'm also that guy. I'm still also on many levels that kid that took action. Look, if I consider it the right thing, I'm
Yeah.
doing it. I'm taking action in spite of anything, in spite of the risk. And I think that I need. And it's funny, is you've lined up a lot of guests that are going to challenge my view, and already my view has expanded somewhat, I think. And so I want to go into those conversations. I want to understand exactly the stuff that we've just expressed. And I think these are great. These are the questions I think we ask everybody.
Oh
What
yeah.
first politically activated you? And to understand their context. And I think to humanize every single person that comes on here, meaning
Absolutely.
we bring on hard right people, we bring on hard left people, we bring on anybody that's like, maybe they're centrist except for this crazy right thing, or maybe they're centrist except for this crazy left thing. And by crazy, I mean extreme.
Yeah. Yeah.
By humanizing them, I think we get, the goal of this podcast will be to get people more understanding that we're all just human. Get out of the and get out of the tribalism, because in tribalism, there's a space now where it's happening, I think, more and more, where the tribalists are completely otherizing the people on the other side, whatever distinct extreme there is. And then they're turning them into non-humans. They're making up spaces for that person that don't necessarily, I recently, in discussing, one of the friend I'm talking about, although I'm not going to say their name right now because they haven't agreed to come on. They have a very leftist extreme viewpoint. And we were in the middle of a knockdown, drag out, just almost fight, right?
Yeah.
About some of this stuff. But my point to them was, look, this Trump loving MAGA, he's a black man who believes in reparations as well. How do you reconcile that for yourself? He's not what you're saying. He's not an evil person. Look, I know this person from business, and they have integrity that doesn't exist anymore. Real integrity, where they say something's going to work, and when it doesn't, they eat the whole sandwich to make it work. That type of integrity is extremely rare. And so how can you not see them as a human just simply with different political values? And why don't we talk about the various differences and maybe see if we can't work it out so that we can still live together in this pluralistic society? Same thing with people on the left, same situation, by having a humanizing conversation with them and then talk from that lens, from that space. I'm not here to grind you down. I'm not here to out debate you and show you you're wrong. I'm trying to figure out not only where you come from, but how we can work together and how we can live together in this country, in this society, in this shared American culture, in a nice, sort of nicer, easier way.
Well, when I was younger, I used to, politicians all the time used to, when they were trying to trumpet this idea of unity, they would talk about, remember the good old days when Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill would have lunch together. And I used to make fun of that. But as I've gotten older, I'm like, we have lost that, right? Like we have lost that.
I mean, to be fair, there was a little bit of simplifying going on there in the media, but keep going. Sorry.
Yeah, no, for sure. But at the same time, something like that is just a foreign concept in 2023. Like everything is so polarized. Everyone is so passionately against the other side. Like not a situation where we don't agree with you, but we don't agree with you and you're a group of pedophiles. Right,
which is ridiculous. Which, by the way, again, is so simplistic. It's so stupid.
Yeah, it's right. That's the thing. No nuance, right? Zero nuance.
Not only no nuance, but literally in that case, as an example, Rufo, the Republican operative, has publicly stated what he's going to do with that, and he is doing it. And the craziness that there are people that can't see that and can't know that this is just a political. This is just a way to amp up the fire between people. Call him a pedophile. Yeah, that's right. You're a pedophile. It's just ridiculous. It's senseless. But
that's like 30 years removed, someone taking what Lee Atwater did and just amping it up to 1,000. We'll get into some Lee Atwater discussions, I'm sure, over the course of this podcast, because I do think a lot of this vitriol that we experience today springs from the well of Lee Atwater. But so let's switch gears now. I'm going to have you talk to me a little bit, and then we're going to keep talking back and forth. But this is kind of just a structured way because this is our first podcast, everybody. We're figuring out on the fly.
Right. By the way, so this is actually when I saw what you put for me, at first I was not overwhelmed, but at least I got really sort of like, but I think that the Billy Ray origin story is actually much more interesting. So describe not only your family's political leanings, but the actual community you came from, that to where you have ties now.
Sure. So, I grew up in Pisgah, Alabama, which is a very tiny community in Jackson County, Alabama. We're wedged between Flat Rock and Blowgourd. And yes, those are real communities. And so, I grew up in a firmly middle-class household. My father, my mother, they worked hard. My mother actually just retired earlier this year. And so I grew up in a Democratic household. So my parents were both Democrats. Now, they were not Democrats. They were certainly not liberals, but they were Democrats. And they were a bit of a cross between an old school Dixiecrat and the Bill Clinton Democrat, right?
Right.
They were somewhere in the middle of that.
Right. And the Bill
But
Clinton Democrat being slightly right Democrat, but keep going. Sorry.
no, absolutely. Very, very centrist Democrat, right? Bill Clinton, and sometimes right. Absolutely. But you know what? Most of my community back then felt more blue than red.
Right.
And over the years, that's obviously shifted considerably. But yeah, I grew up in a household where, everybody was always, railing against Republicans, railing against whatever the Republicans were doing next. And, I remember being a kid and listening to my dad, bitch and moan about George Bush Sr. and how he was running the country into the ground. And so that was kind of sort of instilled in me at a young age. And when I was younger, I think Democratic policies just made more sense to me. Like, even as a kid, like when you're a kid, what are the things you learn as a kid? You learn to share. You learn to treat others with respect. If you're a church going person, which I was as a young kid, you learn to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Like, you learn all of these things. So with those things baked in my mind as a kid, Democratic ideas just made more sense to me because, the Democrats seemed to care about people. They seemed to be the party that was in favor of supporting people and helping people through tough times. And that's where I latched onto the Democratic Party. And when I came of age and was, in high school, when I knew I was about to go vote, I really became politically energized at that point because it was my first time to actually be able to get to do this thing that I'd been wanting to do for so long. And that, of course, was the Bush-Gore election. And we know how that went. Basically threw my vote away on that one, or had it stolen, had it stolen by the Supreme Court.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, so, I mean, I don't want to get too ahead of myself there, but yeah, so I grew up in a very rural, conservative area where people just happened to be Democrats at the time.
Right.
And
that had to do with the alignment leftover from years past.
Oh, it's the George Wallace Democrat, right? George Wallace, say what you want about George Wallace, he did some abhorrent things when he was in charge, but it's that last vestige of that sort of Democrat, and it's gone now. Like, my parents still vote Democrat, but it's gone in terms of that area. Like, that area now, my parents are surrounded by, Trump signs. And that said, I've told this before, I grew up in a place where you could drive half a mile down the road to a Confederate surplus store, and every year there would be a sign out front that said, celebrate Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday, Confederate flags half off. Yeah. This was up until 10, 15 years ago. And there's still Klan rallies where I come from. They still do Klan rallies regularly I come from a place called Sand Mountain, right? Which it's actually a plateau, but we call it Sand Mountain. It's a lot of different communities up there. And if you go down into one of the cities like Chattanooga, Tennessee, and you tell people if you tell a black person you're from Sand Mountain, they know what that means.
Right.
They know exactly what that means.
It's fair to call that a white stronghold, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a restaurant in 3 blocks away from where my parents live. And I've been in that restaurant with a whole restaurant full of people, and someone will walk in who is Hispanic, Asian, black, doesn't matter. The place will go to you could hear a pin drop, and you'll hear someone be like, "Can I help you?"
Everybody looks
it is that place. Yeah. It is that community.
That's the movie scene, right?
Yeah, it is that community. And, and I know I get from people all the time, well, how can you stand being there and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, I get where people are coming from, but at the same time, it's what I grew up there. I know these people. I know they have a lot of problematic, takes, and that they're not, always the best people, but that's where I come from, right? I'm not going to just abandon the place that I grew up. And, but yeah, that's sort of my early political leanings and sort of where I sort of started out. So I was a very tiny, tiny blue dot in a very red state.
Right. So and now for you, when was your first moment when you became politically activated? When do you because look, I know, so not that, it's funny, we didn't ask about this earlier, but I'm pretty sure you're out about it. You said to me the other day that you came out when you were 13, right?
Yeah, right. I started coming out.
Right, started coming out. There people that were close to you. Not that anybody doesn't know, but Billy Ray is gay. So,
how dare you, Erik? You've outed me on a live podcast. I'm kidding.
First one. But I'm making up that this is part of the alignment there. But did you express yourself as a gay child, as a gay teenager before you were political, or was that part of it, or did that inform it, or how did all that work? And not that by the way, it may be totally separate. That I'm interested in
Yeah,
too.
it is actually weirdly totally separate. You know, I think a lot of people who know me, I'm a gay person and I'm a proud gay person, but I'm not necessarily an activist gay person, right?
Right,
Like, there are a lot of people out there that gay or queer is how they define themselves.
right, right,
Like, I'm not that person. Like, I am so many things before I'm a gay man, right?
right,
Like,
right. It's like your eye color, blue
yeah,
eye,
yeah, exactly. I'm
blue
a
brown eyes,
southerner.
gay,
I'm a
like that. Yeah,
southerner, I'm a son, I'm a friend, I'm an uncle, like I'm all these things before I am a gay man. And that's just that's how I am, right? And
right,
so I've always been that way. Like I've never been someone who was like going to throw their gayness in your face. Like
right.
I'm not that person. And a lot of that is because I knew, I only started coming out when I was 13. I knew that I was, different when I was 5 years old, right?
Right,
And I
right.
don't think I was able to put a name to it probably until I was about 9 or 10 when I knew like, okay, it's probably this, right? And so I had learned how to assimilate years before. Like, all like I mean, in hindsight, I thought I was the only person like that in my class. Now I know that there were 4 or 5 of us, right?
Right.
And but at the time, all of my best friends were straight, all of my friend groups were straight. So I learned how to sort of assimilate and fit in, which is why for such a long time, people would never, ever guess that I was gay for so long. Like
Can I
they
ask
would
you,
be shocked when I told them that I was gay
right.
because I didn't act like what they thought of a gay person as
Well,
acting.
could I ask you a question? So you didn't feel, and I'm saying this because I had so many friends
Yeah.
who, when it was just past when they were 18, they would come out and they would disappear from the friend group, and it was terrible because these were
No.
some awesome people. You didn't have to do that, did you?
No, no, I didn't. And keep in mind that when I say came out when I was 13, I do want to be clear. It was a very staggered process. Like I wasn't fully like completely out to everybody until probably my first year of college.
Got it.
And
Got
that
it.
was when it was like, I don't care anymore. I'm not keeping it a secret from anybody,
Got it.
loud and proud, right?
Right.
And so it was a slow build up to them. Like even some of my closest friends didn't even know until I was, in high school or college because I
Right.
was very selective about who I told. And, we'll get into this later, but I was a camp kid as well. Like I spent a lot of time at camp as a kid. And so, like, some of my camp friends knew, but some of my friends in high school had no clue.
Right.
And so it was very selective about who I told and how I told them because I was worried. I did have some concerns about like how will people react when they know this? Like how will people react? And I did find out as I started confiding in different people that it actually wasn't a big deal. Like I'm one of the lucky ones, right? I didn't really lose any friends. I didn't really
Right.
lose anybody. They may have disapproved. They may not have approved of my lifestyle, but they weren't gonna like, banish me and not have anything to do with me.
Right.
Because
I think you're also courageous. To be honest with you, I'm just going to say that and I mean, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but you're a courageous person. It's one of the things I just honestly love about you. You do not step back from your stated position. You don't hide, you don't care. And I've seen you in the gale just stand there, here I stand. And so I think that maybe that was part of it too. And in that space, but you did go to college and become politically active.
yeah,
You
yeah,
went. So when did you become politically
yeah, yeah.
activated? And what was it that
So
caused it?
it was weirdly, it was a couple of issues, right? One was a tangentially, well, not even a tangentially gay issue. It was a gay issue, but I'll start with the one that wasn't, and it was the Rwandan genocides.
Right.
That was the moment because I was already politically charged to a degree. I was interested. Like I watched the news every night. Like I was staying interested in things. And I remember when the Rwanda genocides happened, and I was a Clinton fan. Like I was a Bill Clinton fan. I still am a Bill Clinton fan. I am. But I was so disappointed and so upset with the way that I thought he was handling that. And the fact that this horrific atrocity was happening essentially right before our eyes and we weren't doing anything. And that's when my brain started. That's when the rational thinking really started, where I was like, well, why aren't we doing anything? Oh, well, we're not doing anything because they're black. They have no resources that we need in their country. Like
Right.
us going there has no benefit to us other than helping out our fellow man. And it was so infuriating to me that that's what we did, that I was just like, I was beside myself for a while because I was a Clinton fan and I was starting to really get excited about politics and this idea of politics. And that was kind of the first thing. But the other thing was, as I started, when I finally put a name on how I was feeling, when I finally was like, okay, you're probably gay, right? That's
Yep.
when I started doing research and started learning, like, well, what does that mean, right? And
Yeah. What
that's
does
when
it
I
mean to be
got
gay? Right.
and that's when I got really into the AIDS epidemic and started learning about AIDS and where it came from. And those same feelings that I had towards Bill Clinton for the way he handled the Rwandan genocides were the exact same feelings I had towards Reagan for the way he handled the AIDS crisis.
Right.
And that's when I was like, and that's when it just kind of all coalesced together for me. And that's when I just got really excited about politics in high school and in college. You know, I majored in political science in college. I just went all in, like Model Arab League, Model UN. Like I was wanting to do everything I could to learn more and more about, you know, how politics were affecting different countries. And I guess when I went to school for political science, international relations was sort of where I really honed in. But yeah, so it was definitely the convergence of like both of those disparate genocides weirdly are kind of what coalesced to kind of make me politically charged.
Right. You know, it's funny though. So I don't know. I mean, some people who know of you, you know that you were active in the Birmingham, theater scene. And what's
Sure.
interesting is, instead of becoming a politician, you said you almost vote. Was it the Birmingham, city council?
Yeah, very quickly, and I won't dwell on this too much, but after I got out of college, um I'd initially wanted to. I was going to move to New York or LA when I
Yeah.
first got out of college. That was my goal. I wanted to move to one of those areas. But me and a friend of mine, Cindy DeSaw, were sitting at a restaurant one day and we were like, hey, we're not the biggest fan of what's going on theater wise in the city right now. What if we started our own theater? Little did I know that conversation over fucking biscuits and grits would lead to like an 8-year commitment that I did not expect at the time, where I ran, I started and ran a theater company in Birmingham. And that kept me in Birmingham 8 years longer than I had expected.
Look,
And
knowing the content of that time, like I've watched some of the stuff. There's stuff out there of the work that you did.
yeah.
Are you saying that was, to me, that was a political act? I assert. I'm not saying it
Oh,
is, but the space that you brought with that theater in Birmingham, Alabama, at the time you brought it, it couldn't not be political. But I'm
yeah.
asserting that. Tell me, what do you think of that? Do you think
No,
that your expression was a political expression as well as an artistic one?
I don't think it was intentionally that, but I think it definitely was that, right?
Right.
I think it was that whether I intended it or not, because you're right. Part of the reason I wrote the kind of shows that I wrote was because I wanted to see how much I could get away with, right? Like
Right.
what's the breaking point where I'm going to lose an audience? Like how
Right.
far can I push the envelope? And look, I'm an open book. The videos of my shows are all on YouTube. Some of them are abhorrently offensive. They really are. Like
No,
they
but
really are.
and awesome. But let's keep
But
going.
but I will say, like, I'm an equal opportunity offender. I poked fun at every group equally, and I always did it with those people in community. I never did it. We were never laughing at somebody. We were always laughing
Right.
with
Like
them.
you didn't
And
have an actor engage in something that was against their consent. In fact, you
not at
sought
all.
out their consent. We've
Exactly.
discussed this before.
If
Yeah.
they were
Okay.
not
Good.
comfortable, we would not do it. And that was really what it was. And so yeah, it was certainly politically charged in a lot of ways. And that was probably my way of staying politically engaged to some degree while I was doing this thing that was totally separate from what I went to school for and what up until that point I'd been really excited about. But to answer your question, probably about 2 or 3 years before I left Birmingham to head to LA, I did have this crazy idea where it was like, well, what if I ran for city council? Like I was by far, I was so not like a huge name in Birmingham, but I was like, I feel like there should be more queer representation on the city council. Like it would be fun to run for public office because it was something that I always thought about in the back of my head. And
Right.
so I thought about it. Like I did some like exploratory work and saw what it was going to look like, who else was running. Like I
Right.
came very close, ultimately decided not to do it. And in hindsight, I'm glad that I didn't, because I would not have been ready for something like that. But it did cross my mind, and it's still in my mind at some point. I still would love at some point to run for political office.
Right.
But but yeah, that was kind of it for me. That was the one moment where I almost did it, but not quite.
Well, good segue then. So now, like if you were to run now, where you are politically so where are you now politically? That would be important if you were to run now. So where are you now politically?
I am politically right now where I have to assume a lot of Americans are, which is I'm in the fed up party.
The vast middle. The
Yeah,
vast middle.
I mean, I am, because, over the years, I've watched the parties switch places, right? Like you mentioned earlier, you were talking about you were talking about the Republicans canceling earlier.
Yes, yes.
And
And by
about
the way, into the 80s and 90s,
oh yeah,
right?
and that's what they were known for, right?
Right.
Now who's known for that? It's not
Right.
the right. It's
No.
not the right, it's the left. And
Right.
so, whereas Republicans have taken over some of the Democratic ideas, which is like, I hate to just say it, but like racism, homophobia, transphobia, those used to be things that back in the 60s would have been Democratic values.
Yes.
Now
Right.
they are
Right.
Republican values.
Right.
And
Go ahead. Sorry.
and yeah, and then just like the parties are just switching policies left and right. And I don't know
Well,
where I
one thing I
stand.
do want to say here, though, let's be fair. What the crazy thing for me is to watch now the Republican administrations in various states now go all in on the
Yeah.
old school Republican move, which is to ban books, to
Oh,
ban teaching. That's not. And what's crazy to me, it's like you guys had the moral and ethical high ground, not being the cancelers, but now you're going to use the
yep.
state system to throw out books. If you're throwing out Toni Morrison's Beloved, what kind of a ridiculous person are you? That is not a book that is in any way terrible for a young adult to read.
No.
It's ridiculous. As an example. And then, so what's terrible now is you have the horseshoe effect of the far right and the far left willing to suppress speech, willing to cancel speech. And it's to me, as a radical social libertarian, really, in the end, I think that's ridiculous. But keep going. I just wanted to bring that up in that space.
But you're absolutely right that it's ridiculous, and that's part of the issue. Is I don't know where I belong anymore,
Right.
because yes, in terms of policy, I identify overwhelmingly with a sort of liberal agenda. I do, for the most part, with some exceptions. Some we'll get into, some we won't. But I do identify more with the liberals. That said, so much of what liberals are doing right now drives me insane. And I think they're doing damage to the party. I think they're doing damage to society in a lot of ways. And a lot of that is like, you mentioned earlier about people trying to, well, I won't get into that part, but what I will say is, this cancel culture is something we'll talk about, I'm sure, over this. And I know people have very strong reactions to that term, cancel culture, what it means, what it doesn't mean. But I don't think anybody can debate that we are living in the age of cancel culture. Like
Right.
this, we are thoroughly in the midst of it. And this idea that anybody, whether you're Republican or liberal or libertarian or whatever, that you can say one thing, maybe you had a bad day and it just came out. Maybe you
Right.
said something by accident. Maybe you said it intentionally, whatever. You can say one thing. And the idea is you have to be canceled to the extent that you never get to participate in the discussion again.
Right. And it's crazy because we now live in an age of media permanence, right?
Yeah.
One of the things that I had to confront in doing this program is that stuff that I say is now going to be out there forever. I didn't
Yep.
have to live through
Yep.
that in the late 80s, early 90s, really. I mean, sure, somewhere in the early 90s, it started to happen. To me, it was this slow crescendo of things that you said or did would be around forever. But I'll tell you now, in the late 70s, early 80s, things would happen and they were gone. Like
Yeah.
nobody would ever see it again. I've
Yeah.
forgotten most of the things that happened during that time. I'm not saying I don't have the big pieces, but a lot of the crazy stuff that went down, nobody will ever see. You can't be canceled for it. You can't be shamed for it. Was it John Ronson? He did that book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed. It did such a great review of that behavior, which is just, to me, again, I think a radical social libertarian, I think it's just antithetical. The concept, because I'll talk about speech suppression. And so many of my liberal friends will go down the road of, well, I'm not talking about governmental suppression of speech. I'm like, no. Any suppression of
No.
speech by any manner possible is ridiculous. That if you can't feel free to express yourself, which by the way is itself an act of integrity, like the old school sort of, the pirates, they would go out there, not all of them, but many of them, they were self-declared to the world. We are
Yeah.
pirates. We are taking your things. And they would
Yeah.
engage in that behavior. That has at least integrity. At least they're saying to the world, to the society, we're not part of your system and we're here to break it. That to me is an integrity. And so when you have some Nazi who I think is a ridiculous person stand up and say, I believe in X and it's ridiculous and it's racist and it's terrible. At least they're being honest enough to say it publicly. They're not hiding it in the back, like something that they're, some secret filter that they're running their life through, which is ridiculous to me. I think that the suppression of speech in any way causes people to hide their true feelings, and it degrades and makes more toxic the society that we're in, more poisonous. Anyway, sorry, keep going.
No, you're absolutely right, and this gets into that conversation, which is that each side of the aisle is constantly sort of banging the drum that they are promoting free speech and protecting free speech, when neither are. Like whether it's a Republican banning books because they don't like for a little girl to know about what menstruation is, or it's a liberal who is like shouting down a speaker on a college campus because they don't agree with what they're saying.
Yeah,
It's
like,
both.
or
They're
like
both suppressions. Yeah.
Yeah,
They're
or in
both,
Burbank, they banned Huckleberry Finn from the school reading program. And then again, every liberal go, well, it's still in the library. Well, so what? It used to be a well-worn American classic that, to be fair, for me at least, exposed me to the weird sort of cultural racism of that time. Like, it allowed me to really review and remember, at least, and when I say remember, I mean culturally remember how it was back then. You've now taken that away from students in Burbank because why? Because it's going to harm people in some place. And I realize that there's another side to this, and maybe we
let's
should
be clear,
have
though.
the people on that did this. But anyways, go ahead.
Well, no, but let's be clear. What's worse, right? You've got Republicans banning books, and you've got liberals changing books. What's worse, right? Like, you've got liberals going in and like changing books so that people don't use the word fat anymore.
Right.
Like what's worse, changing a book or banning it? I think they're both pretty evenly bad.
Right.
And this idea that we have to like spoon feed our children everything and that we can't let them learn from themselves or like figure things out or reason for themselves is so upsetting. And I just don't know, like both parties right now, people talk about how different they are. My issue with them is how similar they are.
Right. How their tactics have sort of unified.
Yeah.
And in fact, you'll hear this. At least I've heard it from many people who are, excuse me, leftist. Like they're from the left. They're political people. They want to do stuff politically, and they'll put it to me in the space of, we're at war. This is the best tactic, and this is what we're going to do. It's such a tribalist. It's like the Patriots. It's like the Patriots versus the Broncos. It's like, dude, it's not okay. Relax. It's like if we're going to be advocates for a society where we all feel comfortable to live in, this is reducing that. This is reducing that ability for us to comfortably live in. If you're so polarized that you don't talk to a third or a half or all of your family anymore, that's a mistake. You've broken the system. You're now literally doing the thing that I would assert reduces the cohesiveness of society, and it's already reduced the cohesiveness of your own family. Okay, do it, but it may not be the mood that you think it is. Just saying.
Yeah, I've never understood that, the whole like, well, I don't agree with these people, so I can't talk to them, or I have to block them because they have a differing point of view than me. And like, I grew up surrounded by people who believed differently than I did. Like, that was my whole upbringing. That's my whole childhood. I'm just used to it, I guess. But here's a great example. It's a tangential example, but I have a friend from Birmingham, and I won't name them, but I have a friend in Birmingham. They're gay, and they have a very rocky relationship with their parents.
Right.
And it's not because their parents like refuse to talk to them or refuse to accept them or refuse anything like that. They do. they just don't do it universally, right? Like this
Right.
person's
They
mom,
don't do it the way they want them to do it.
yeah, like the
Yeah.
mom is like, you're my son. I love you. I'm always going to love you. But, I am also a Christian. I don't believe that this is right. I can't support the lifestyle, but I love you. And I'm like, and I get it. Look, I don't speak for every gay person. I can only speak from my own personal experience. But for me, that's enough. Like, I don't expect people who have grown up, who have spent 50, 60 years under this very strict value system. I don't expect them to just change that value system overnight because of me. I don't. Like, that's enough for me to know that they still love me, that they support me. They just can't support my life. I don't care. Like, I mean, luckily my parents are not that way. I don't have to worry about it. But if they were, I certainly wouldn't stop speaking to my parents. I certainly
Right.
wouldn't alienate them or that relationship because they happen to, because they're enforcing this value system that they've had for so long. I wouldn't do that. I know a lot of people out there do. It's like, you accept me 100% or fuck off. And,
Right.
to each their own. But like you said, I think you're doing damage in certain ways. Like, I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
that causes damage.
I've seen this. No, to be fair, I realized as I was talking to you about this, I actually had a friend in the past who was racist, right? I mean, by the way, that sounds so cheeseball. Sorry. I've had several friends in the past who were racist, but this particular individual was the clearest racist that I knew, that I was still close friends with. And he and I disagreed vehemently about this. I would tease him. I'd be like, "You're out of your mind." I would lecture him, and he put up with
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah.
And what happened is, as my child was born, I was doing my thing, and he would come over. I realized as I looked at his Facebook that he was putting pictures of Michelle Obama as a monkey on his
Oh,
Facebook.
my God.
And I was like, I was friends with this guy. He's on my Facebook, and I work at the VIP community. Hold on one second, honey. I'm doing this. You got to come back, okay? I love you. 30 minutes, okay?
30 more minutes.
30 more minutes, okay? I promise. Yes, in 30 minutes. I promise, okay? I love you. Are you gonna kiss me? I love you. Oh, I love you. 30 minutes, I promise, okay? Bye.
What you just missed there was a very tender dad moment with Erik and his daughter that was quite lovely.
We're not going to, well, I don't know if we're going to cut that out. Maybe we will. I think we should leave it in because I think that's a good context. So you see my context, but whatever. But that I ultimately had to remove him as a friend on Facebook because I work at an extraordinarily liberal organization. And also, I was like, this is not something that I will be publicly associated with. I'm not going to be associated with this. Sorry, I'm wiggling my camera. I will not be associated with that. It's ridiculous. Dude, are you kidding me? Like, come on. So I removed it, and I didn't say anything to him. Like, he'd been to my house a couple of times since then. His girlfriend figured it out and starts calling me out on Facebook. And I was like, I didn't know how to deal with it without telling her, your boyfriend's a racist. I can't have that stuff be associated with me. I won't allow that to be associated with me because that is absolutely not where I come from as an individual. And so what's sad is he and I don't speak anymore because he didn't want to deal with the fact that I essentially canceled him from my public space. And I did. I had to. So to be fair, yeah, I've had to cancel people too because if you're going to be a racist, if you're going to come into my office, if you're going to come into my life, somebody needs to be either personally or professionally, and you're going to say racist stuff, not here you're not, and not here in front of how about this? Never in front of my daughter.
Yeah.
Ever. And because that's it's gross. It's gross to me. And look, I'm not let me be clear. I'm not some like Jesus figure, right? I'm not some like advanced higher power. Okay. That's ridiculous. The reality is as a child, I could never get it. It never logically made sense to me. The concept that someone's skin color or their belief system made them some separate person. Yeah. I've always seen human beings as human beings. And to be fair, when you get down to the basics of human being, outside of the cultural effect that some people may have, they're all the same. They're identical. And so I never got the skin color thing. It's not because I didn't have enculturation around racism. Of course I did. I'm a 53-year-old man. I was alive in the 70s when racism was absolutely alive and well. But guess what? I just thought it was dumb. So I'm not special. I'm not
Yeah.
like, and you saw her. I love that woman. That I love the woman that made her. I love that little girl. That woman.
Yeah.
That little girl is everything to me. And I'm not going to allow that space around her as long as I can. Sure, she'll see it out there.
Yeah.
And she has, by the way. And she's had questions. And I just do exactly what I do with you. It's ridiculous. Don't listen to them. Some people are dumb, honey. Like I've literally put, some people are just dumb. They don't get
Yeah.
it. Sorry. Like that.
No. Well,
So,
that they are. And I mean, absolutely. And
so in the cancellation conversation, I have
Yeah.
to admit that I too have had to cancel people, and
Well,
I
I have
understand
as
that
well.
I understand that some people may want to expand their political action or their social action into their private space more than I do. Great, but the way it's showing up in society now is suppression of speech, which I find abhorrent and ridiculous, and I will never support it, and I will actually rail against it, much like I have.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm the same way. I am not violently, but vehemently pro First Amendment in all of its forms, and I just don't think you can pick and choose. I don't think you get to just cherry pick what free speech you want to protect and what free speech you want to shout down. Like, look, a good example. I hate Matt Walsh. I think he is
Right.
a hateful bigot,
Yeah, he's mean. Yeah.
and
That's terrible.
I don't care for him. That said, I will defend his right to say whatever he wants to say.
Absolutely.
You know, if I don't want to hear him, I won't go to his fucking lecture.
Right.
Like, that's my choice as a free
Right.
American. I can choose what I want to go listen to, but I do not have the right to prevent other people from going to listen to that. And because not everybody who goes to see Matt, I mean, yes, a majority of people who go to see someone like that are going because they espouse the same beliefs, but not everybody. Some people want to go because they want to, you know, they want to hear multiple sides of an argument, or they
Right.
want to, like, and they're trying to form their opinion. And maybe they need to get that bullshit bad opinion in their head so they can push it out. And like, I don't understand that. I don't understand that mentality of like, we have to shut down views that are separate from ours. I mean, I've blocked people. Look, I've blocked people on Facebook and Twitter.
Yeah.
Like, occasionally someone is just going too far, right? Like, either they're being like too racist or too homophobic or too
Right.
something. And
Right.
you just, for your own sanity and your own well-being, you have to get rid of them. Right.
Yeah, but what's crazy to me is that the attempt to suppress speech is not necessarily the most effective way to deal with that speech. To be honest, imagine if someone who really understood, in the case of the gender conversation and Matt Walsh's, you know, what is a woman? If there was someone who could adequately answer that question, imagine this. They would walk into a space where Matt Walsh is, and he goes spaces and he'll take questions.
Oh, yeah.
And what you see mostly of is him taking questions from people who aren't adequately prepared, so they don't answer the question well. And then, so the next move is suppress his speech? No. A person needs to go there, stand up, discuss that question, answer that question in a way that leaves the listener touched, moved, and inspired, and he would be done in a day, in a week, in a minute. But instead, you know,
well, there's a reason you don't see Matt Walsh sitting down for like a conversation with, I mean, I'll use this person as an example, not that they would ever sit down with Matt Walsh, but like, what would happen if Matt Walsh sat down with Michelle Obama, right? For a conversation about like that's what he's doing though. And that is part of the trick, right? Is he's putting himself in these positions where he's going up against these very passionate college kids in most cases who have very, very liberal views, and they're not prepared for him being, you know, he is a great debater. Like, he understands the tenets of debate, and they're not prepared for that. It's the same thing with Ted Cruz. I think Ted Cruz is a buffoon, but you know what? He's a skilled orator. He knows how to get a point across. He knows how to debate. I'll give him credit for that. Nothing else. But like, ever since his spaceship landed on this planet, Ted Cruz has been all about, you know, attacking people with his words, and he's eloquent at that. And
sometimes, at least,
sometimes
he's a buffoon. But look, hold on, with the Matt Walsh question, fine, not Michelle Obama, but what about Natalie Wynn? You know, ContraPoints.
Sure.
She could go in there and rock his ass,
Absolutely.
and he would likely do the conversation. But Natalie Wynn herself has chosen not only not to do that, but another example would be in the J.K. Rowling conversation. Hold on. Why don't you talk to J.K. Rowling then, Natalie Wynn? I mean, you were in the recent podcast that came out, you know, the Witch Trials of J.K. Rowling. And by the way, so effectively communicated the point and the space of the transgendered question. Just really, like, with Natalie Wynn is the single for me at least, okay, this is personal, the single glowing light of sense that I can hear from a lot of the transgendered activist space, where I'm like, man, she's right. She's right. So she could, however, show up at a Matt Walsh event and drop a bomb and get it done in a way that might affect his audience. See, that's the game here. The game here in accepting different voices in the room is who can leave the end audience, the listener. Again, I want to use those words, touched, moved, and inspired, such that they change their space of belief, change their space of expression right there. And that's when it would happen, right there. Anyways, but you get my point.
So now what? Well, I think let's talk a little bit about, we've talked sort of a fair amount about what we're trying to get out of this podcast.
Right.
But I want to be clear for folks listening, because I really was serious earlier. Obviously, we want you to listen to the podcast. We think that we have unique perspectives. And I just don't personally think there are enough podcasts that really do sort of take a center approach. And so that's what I'm hoping to do with this. So a little idea about the types of guests we're going to have on, because I don't want anybody, people, the word triggered is a big thing these days. I am one of the lucky people who is triggered by pretty much nothing, but I know people out there are triggered by certain things. So we're going to have people from all sides of the aisle on this podcast. So we're going to have far left liberals. We're going to have MAGA Republicans. We're going to have centrists. We're going to have people from not even necessarily on the political spectrum, but who are, people that we want to have discussions with. About
people who have made significant, or at least some contribution to the discussion of the framework around political contribution. Like I've discussed a specific political scientist that I'd love to have on, and their comparisons of between, for instance, the American political system and the Chinese political system. Yuan Ong, who is an amazing, if she would ever deign to do this, and we'll see, who really has, for me, brought up important context when we talk about China. Those types of things, the political space will be either their direct advocacy, or maybe they're the people that help define the context in which politics actually happens, right?
Yeah, and we got a good lineup so far. We're going to keep adding more and more guests. I just want to make sure that you're aware as you listen that we are going to have differing viewpoints from yours. And that's the whole point of this podcast. I encourage you to listen to those viewpoints. You may not agree with them. You may firmly, vehemently disagree with them. So what? We might also, we're going to probably disagree with a lot of the guests that we have on the show, and that's okay. The idea is to at least spark some debate, spark some discussion, so that maybe, hopefully, we can at least come together on an issue or a topic, where we can find some common ground that wouldn't exist otherwise.
Right. I also want to add that if you're a person that is in this space, right, in the space of public expression of your political beliefs and values, I absolutely would love to hear from you. And I would absolutely love to discuss things with you on this podcast. And the reason why is, maybe we're missing something. Likely we're missing something.
Yeah.
And having the different voices on here. And again, I'm not looking for a debate bro experience, because I'm not going to do, I'll debate, I'll have conversation, but I actually feel like I have a lot more to learn versus a lot more to tell. I'm not so much I'm not a guru. I'm not a political guru whatsoever. However, I think I am a good listener, at least when I try, and I'll be trying here.
Yeah, I feel like I've become a much better listener the older and older I've gotten. I think, as a lot of my friends would say, there was a time when if I would get involved in a political discussion, I would just go into beast mode and try to shut it down. And now I've become far more I do want to hear other opinions and ideas, because and it doesn't matter where they're coming from. I know my values. There's no MAGA Republican in the world who is going to convince me that their values are my values, right? That doesn't exist, but that doesn't mean that I can't learn something from them, even if that's just figuring out why they came to believe the beliefs that they have, because that's what's getting lost in the conversation is we're trying to, eradicate nuance, and it's either you're a good person or you're a monster, and there's no middle ground.
And it's impossible for everybody to be right. The other thing I think is, if I'm talking to someone who's a right-wing MAGA Republican, and there are several. As an example, my half brother is absolutely, but to be fair, he's not cutting promos, saying crazy stuff to get a reaction. He's not that guy. And he has he's a two-time, he went to both Iraq He's a veteran of the Navy. Went to both Iraq wars, essentially.
Yeah.
So he has that viewpoint, but he is an honorable man. He's an honorable man, a good father, a good grandfather, a great brother. And honestly, we really didn't rekindle our relationship until like the past 10 years, maybe. And he is absolutely a Trump guy. And to be fair, there is a world in which he and I can live together and simply disagree about it. And in fact, one of the other, again, is another friend of mine. I haven't gotten his consent yet to even use his name, and he's thinking. In fact, I want to bring him on here. And this is the gentleman. He's black. He's also a MAGA Republican. I've asked him questions. He'll come to me and say, you and I share a lot of values. Why don't you vote? Why wouldn't you ever vote Republican? And I would say, look, if a Republican stepped up and at least gave a space to where they would compromise on a couple of things, I could absolutely see throwing them my vote right now instead of Biden. I could absolutely see that. However, if you're coming on and you're going to say we should enforce austerity, we should take all money out of public mental and medical health, and then I ask the question, well, okay, fine, taxation's theft. What do you do about the people that are going to suffer when that happens? How do you deal with that? And they don't really, I would assert, they don't really have a question to answer that. See, that's the space. That right there. How do we give people what they need, or at least assist people in giving them a space to get what they need, right? Sure, we have those who are producing and competing well in society, but there are going to be those that fail at competing. Are we really saying that we need the results of failing to compete in this very competitive society to be death, to be starvation? Come on. I mean, it's ridiculous. See, that's what I'm saying is I bet that there's a space there where conservatives and liberals could find a middle ground that they both hate, but would damage society least. Can we go there? Maybe.
I the way you just put it, I think is perfect. And I agree. Like, that's what I'm searching for through this, for sure. Like, I look at this as a journey that we're kind of all on together. You know, like you've said, Erik, a couple of times, this is more of a learning experience for me, because I am someone who I consider that we're both cis white middle-aged guys. I would say that we have mildly above average intelligence. I think that's fair. At least in certain areas, and I'd say certain areas we have much higher than average, intelligence.
Right. By the way, I want to add something to that, and maybe because of the luck in our lives, the people who we were exposed to as children, the people who were exposed to as teenagers. I was lucky to have some really, really, really intelligent, really, really successful, really, really competent people exposed to me as I was getting older. And really what they taught me is how to make it work, how to be successful. And so I sit here, a guy that has a high school equivalency diploma, as an IT director at a well-respected organization in Los Angeles County. And to be fair, I sit in a room sometimes with 15 or 20 other IT directors, and I'm talking a lot. I'm giving them stuff that they can use, and they're giving me stuff that I can use. So I'm at least competent enough to be a peer to these people. I'm lucky, right? I'm lucky because, by the way, were I black from a slightly different structure, I might have been in jail for the rest of my life. And I'm cognizant of the fact, because you brought up the white cis thing, there's the reality of it. I am a single child from a single mom in 1970. By all rights, I should not even be where I'm at. I have been so lucky, so lucky. And by the way, I don't even think I told you this. Recently, I had a non-specific cerebrovascular event, which they thought was a stroke. And here I am, no problems, all good. I got my brain scan. You can see it. It's right there in my cerebellum. And there have been multiple medical and health issues that have shown up. So outside of my experience of having been, a kid that's grown up in the white American culture since the 70s with whatever that brought. See, the thing I don't think people want to talk about is I'm lucky because my mom, a single mom, she worked 2 and 3 jobs for years and left the planet, leaving me with 2 properties. She didn't leave me with a bill. She left me with largesse and probably gave up most of her life to do it. So I've been very lucky, very lucky. So I come from a position of luck too. Look, honestly, but for the grace of God, so to speak, go I, right?
Yeah. And similar with me too. Like I never once debate on how much luck or entitlement or whatever words you want to use, like
Right.
white
It's luck,
privilege.
it's entitlement,
White
it's
privilege
privilege,
is
all
the
of it.
white word, all of it. Like I understand that I have that. Like I get it. Like I could moan. Like I grew up in a middle class household. Like we weren't rich, but my parents made it work, and I always felt like, we never went hungry. We never had anything like that. I came from a pretty stable household in that way. And like, I feel lucky for that. I feel lucky that I've had opportunities throughout my life. Like, when I first became involved in IT, I had no IT background whatsoever. One of my friends who worked for a large nonprofit was like, "Hey, we need a network administrator. You want to come do it?" Based solely on the fact that I was good on Macs and PCs. And I was like, sure. And I did that job via Google for almost the entire time I was there. I would have never gotten that opportunity had I been
Right.
black. I
Right.
would have never gotten that
Absolutely. Yeah.
opportunity.
No. Of
And like,
course
so
not.
I'm aware of all of that. And I respect it. And I come to all of my discussions and all of my conversations with that in mind, which is why I'm looking forward to having so many different types of voices represented on this podcast.
One thing I want to say is I do think, however, that this lifestyle that I live now, look, I'm not living rich, right?
Sure.
I mean, I got my own office. It's nice. Don't get me wrong. It's nice. My little 12 by 10, fortress of solitude in the backyard in the back corner. I think that the lifestyle that I live is attainable if we do this right, whatever this is, this American society. Everybody could have this. In other words, a house with enough rooms for the kids, with enough food to feed those children and yourself properly, with enough medical care to keep you going. And by the way, education, so that if you want to go someplace and make something of yourself, whether it be trade education or a formal college, whatever type of education, that it be available to you as an individual. I think that's doable in this country. I don't buy that it's not doable. And that's where I like, if I could sit, and I'm going to ask you this question too. If I was given the one, that the I got the 5 gems together and I snapped my fingers, I would make that happen. And so, by the way, if you could have anything happen politically, socially in this country, if you could just do that one, what's his name? The dude.
Thanos.
If you could do the Thanos snap, what would you do politically and socially in this country that would have it be the way that you think would be better?
Oh, wow. That's difficult, right?
You don't have to answer now. But I know, for me, it's the opportunities and the space that I'm in. I still believe everybody could have this because it's not ostentatious. It's not crazy.
Yeah.
It is, again, privileged, and it is, nice. I'm not going to lie. I'm enjoying myself. But I think that it's not so much that we couldn't have this for everybody. So I maybe not now, but I'd love to know.
I'll definitely
what your
think
perfect
on that.
World is.
Well, now I'm going to feel like an asshole if I don't go with your response because yours is so encompassing.
Well, no.
and so
I've thought about it. I've thought about it for a long time because I've had to, in my space of dealing with the luck. Really, it's luck, right? It's funny. People call it privilege now, but really, in the past, it was called luck. You were lucky. And by the way, you better feel how blessed you are if you're in a space to be able to have gotten what you got and to really be living a life that, like, here's crazy. I have the job that I want. If I won $400 million tomorrow in the lotto, I would keep my job. I love working for the company I work for. Maybe I would adjust my role some bit so I'd have some more free time to go do other things. Sure. But would I keep my hand on the stick of IT at that place and make sure that the IT service, the IT infrastructure was serving the place the way I know it serves them now? I would absolutely do that. You know what I'm saying? So I have the job. I love my wife. I'm lucky. Yeah. I got it done. Sure, it took till I was 45. And I'm now 53 with a almost 7-year-old that you saw run in here earlier. But you know what? I'm rolling it and we're going. Yeah. So I want everybody to at least have some of it. Look, to be fair, it's not perfect, right? My health is iffy. I have diabetes. Again, I had this weird, what at the time looked like a stroke, but now nobody knows what it was. I've had stuff go on. And it's a lot of the times because of my own personal choice, how I eat, how I live, what I do, all these choices. To be fair, what I'm trying to escape is the results of my behavior, right?
Yeah.
But that being said, that's the reason why I put it that way. Is I think if other people could have what I'd have, honestly, I'd be like, you know what, dude, work it out. You got what you got. So I would love to hear that question for you, and maybe it's an evolving question for you. Yeah. What would you do if you could change society? Or how about this then? Let's make it easier. If there's just one thing you could do right now today, what would you flip? And this doesn't mean that you have no other options. It's just, what would you do right now?
Right now, if I had to do anything, I think it would be, and this is a conversation that we're going to have later in this podcast, I would make it mandatory that ethics and civics are taught in public schools.
Right.
That would be the one thing that I would do.
A sense of service, right?
There was a time not too long ago where kids went to school and learned how to be good citizens. They learned, what does it take to be a citizen in a democracy? What does it take to give back to a country that is giving something to you?
Right.
And that was a class for decades and decades and decades. And it's just gone. It's just been obliterated. And now all that people think it takes to be a good citizen is to be born in this country. And it's like, that doesn't make you a good citizen. There are plenty of folks all across this country who were not born in this country who are damn sure better citizens than people who were.
Right.
And that's not it. Like, we need that kind of, like, this the Kennedy quote, right? Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. And
right.
it's been parroted so much that it feels like this throwaway line.
It's a trope,
It's very true. It's a very true thing. And we've lost that. We've lost all of that. We've lost that sort of attachment to our country and our democratic values and our ideals. And so that's what I would do. I think if I could do one thing today, that's what I would do.
Got it. So I think we're near the end, right?
Yeah. I want to give people.
I want you to give your final spiel, but I also want you to give you your final parting shot as well, because I got one that I've been holding and I want to absolutely do it. But please go ahead.
Well, mine is less of a spiel and more of just, I want to give people some kind of context moving forward. I want people to have time. Like, if we have guests on that, have books or things like that, I want to give people time, if they want to buy those books, read those books, research those books. So a couple of the guests that we're going to have on coming up, I want to go ahead and give you the titles of their books in case you want to dive in and explore those before we chat with them. Coming up in the next couple months, we're going to have Charla Baciccio on the show. Charla's a friend of mine from Birmingham, now lives in Salt Lake City, and she's the author of a book called My New Normal, A Mother's Journey Through the Opioid Crisis. And it's a book basically about how she responded to her daughter's drug addiction, her daughter's eventual death. And it's an incredible book. Charla's an incredible person. Heavy subject matter, but I think we're going to have a good discussion. Also, I would recommend, we're going to have Dr. Andrew Duxbury on the show, also someone that I know from Birmingham. But Andy is the author of a book called The Accidental Plague Diaries. And this is, it's basically, he's a geriatric doctor. He chronicled the pandemic from day one, every single day, and you get a really great on-the-ground account from an actual scientist who knows what he's talking about. And so we're going to be having some conversations with them. I'd encourage you to check out their books. They're available on Amazon, wherever else you find books. And yeah, just so you have some time to prepare, we're going to be preparing as well.
Next week it's Pamela, though, right?
Well, yeah, so next week we'll be joined by Patricia Todd, and Patricia is a former 3-term member of the Alabama House of Representatives, serving District 54, the first openly gay elected official in the state of Alabama, the former vice chair of the Alabama Democratic Party, and she is currently the Southern Director at Jobs to Move America, a strategic policy center that works to transform public spending and corporate behavior using a comprehensive approach that is rooted in racial and economic justice and community organizing. Also, she is one hell of a poker player.
And I can't wait for her to talk about how she beat your ass.
She's beat my ass several times in poker. We used to play at a buddy of ours, Howard Bayless, in Birmingham, and we would all go over there and have these big, massive poker games. And Patricia did well in those games. But I'm very excited to talk to Patricia. I've known Patricia for a while, since my Birmingham days. They're not all going to be Birmingham guests, I promise you. We've got more than Birmingham guests coming on. It just so happens that those are the 3 we're mentioning.
All right. Well, so is that it?
That's it. That's my spiel. What's your closing shot, Erik?
I apologize for coughing. I have allergies here, which Billy Ray used to be the worst one with allergies. I probably have got you. I just one of the things I'm going to say, and I think that this is really why I'm here, is that you, Billy Ray, are one of the people that I most have admired in my life, in my space together. I'm sorry. I'm going to do it to you. And I can say it like this. I thought about this, and I think this will get past the censors, right? That at a time in my past, Billy Ray was offered the knife to stick in my back, right? I was in the middle of trying to get something done. Someone offered him the position to do damage to me, irreparable damage to me, damage that would have limited my ability to do what I was doing. And in that space, and it's funny, as I realize I'm coming from that Western cultural space, right? Because I'm about to use words that are very, that at the time you showed honor, respect, you were unflinching in your loyalty to me as an individual. You were honest. Again, in the space of really was a gale force wind of possibility when it came to what that could be done to you. And for me, I have had maybe 2 or 3 other people in my life that stood for me that way, that stood for honesty that way, that stood for truth that way. And it was at that moment I knew that you were the guy, that you were one of them. And when I say the guy, I don't mean like the man. You were the person who could stand in the space of truth and honesty and just express yourself and it really meant something to me at that time. And I cannot be more happy to be able to take this path with you, to take this journey with you, to go through and do this, because I know that I can trust you. I don't even have to think. Like, it hit me as I was thinking about doing this. This is a big deal because like we've talked about in this podcast, we're going to say things that are going to be on video and on sound forever. And you are a person that I could trust implicitly in business, all of it. And I realized that, like, aside from my wife, you're equal with, you're one of the people I trust most in life, and you're one of the people I respect most in my life. And I love you, man. And I really appreciate you offering me this opportunity. Thank you.
Well, that was very lovely. And I'm glad that one person can say those things about me in this life.
I bet you there's more than one.
There are. There's more. There's more. I do appreciate that. And yeah, like I said, like when I was thinking about this, you were the only person that came to mind, because again, like, I'm one of those people like you are, where I can have, disagreements, I can have arguments and still respect the person at the end of it. And there aren't a lot of people I feel that way about. Like a lot of people, I know, if I have an argument with them or a disagreement, there's real contempt there. Like there's real, like tangible contempt. And so, yeah. And so, and yeah, I mean, look, I knew from the first day when I was working for you that it was going to be a blast. Like,
it was a great time. So that being said, let's go.
Yeah. So this is the podcast. You now know a little bit about who we are. You now know a little bit more about what the podcast is going to be. Hopefully it's your jam and you're going to keep listening to us. The way that you can find out about what's coming up, follow us on the socials. We are on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram at Center Clueless. That's going to take you there. CenterClueless.com is the website. That can also take you to all of our social channels. Videos are going to be available on YouTube. So you can check those on our YouTube channel, and the podcasts are going to be available wherever you find podcasts, whether that's Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, all the places. You can find it at all the places. And again, Patricia Todd is going to be our guest at the next episode. So please do your Patricia research. If you have any questions that you're like, oh, we would like you to ask Patricia about this, send them our way. Billy Ray at CenterClueless.com, Erik at CenterClueless.com. We will definitely check out your questions, and maybe some of them will make the show. We want to go as deep as we can with our guests. And so, any closing words there, Erik?
Well, that was it. That was actually my thing. The closing word is, I am so happy to be doing this with you. I still can't believe I'm doing this, but awesome. And by the way, this was great. I think it's really the only thing I'm going to change is the headphones I wear. And aside from that, I'm ready to go. I'm really ready to go.
Well, that's it for this episode. So whether you are left, right, center, we hope and pray you are a little less clueless. Until next time, peace.